And so continuing on our annual theme of seeing through new eyes, did you know that nowhere in the Bible does it say that there were specifically three wise men? Early texts put it around the number 12. And it's not true that we only use 10% of our brain. We actually probably use all of our brain. It's just how we're using it. And according to NASA, you cannot see the Great Wall of China from space. I'm sorry, all you people who have been to the Great Wall of China, but that's been proven a few years ago. Further, Napoleon was not shorter than the average person of the day. It was just that he was depicted by British cartoonists as being really, really short. And so that myth perpetuated. And I could go on all day, but I'll share one more interesting one. The forbidden fruit of Adam and Eve is commonly thought of as an apple, but the Bible actually never says what fruit it was. So isn't it interesting how we accept myths and stories like these, and probably thousands more, as facts? And usually when we hear the word myth, we think of an ancient legend or tale, but a myth can be a story that is very present in our lives today, and one that we are totally convinced is true, and we may not even be aware that it isn't true. So that's what I want to visit today. And it's a human tendency to give a story to each person in our orbit, whether it's family or friends, or sometimes we assign a story to a stranger within just a few minutes. And this might all be some survival technique from when we were cave dweller days, where we had to assign pretty quickly friend or foe, because we had to for survival, and figure out if that was an enemy or not. So we had to jump to conclusions for our own survival. But this jumping to conclusions doesn't always serve us. For instance, sometimes, as I mentioned, we can immediately, after meeting someone or with very little information, ascribe intent. We assign meaning to their actions that are just assumptions on our part, and we place them in a box as either good or bad, usually. And maybe the person, maybe it's like the person at the front of the checkout line, and there's 10 people waiting, and then the person is having some sort of a problem. What kind of thoughts go through your mind? You may think, oh gosh, that person doesn't know what they're doing. They're stupid. And maybe you're looking for corroborating evidence of that. It reminds me of a saying from a botanist named John Lubbock, who said, what we see depends mainly on what we look for. So if we're looking for evidence of stupidity, that's what we're gonna see. If we're looking for evidence of, okay, that poor person, they forgot their wallet, it's in the car, we may be looking upon them with compassion. Another example that I thought was interesting is cars on the freeway, such as the slow driver that's holding up all the cars on the road. And how often what do we do when we pass the person? I don't know if you all do this, but I catch myself looking over to see, because if I'm upset that this person is driving 40 miles an hour on the freeway, I'm looking over to, I don't know, if I'm assuming that this person is a moron, let's say, I'm looking over just to confirm that that's the case. But maybe, or if they're high, maybe this person is on their phone, I'm confirming that that's true. But what if the person is scared? What if they just found out something horrible in their lives? What if they're just checked out? What if there's an active health emergency going on? We don't know. One day recently, I was driving and I was noticing all the cars passing me. And after a few minutes, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm that person. I was in the slow lane going maybe 55, around there. But here, if you go 55, you get passed up by everybody. And so I was that person. And I was wondering what other drivers were thinking of me. Same with fast drivers. You might think, okay, someone flies past you 100 miles an hour. What's your first thought? First thought that comes to mind. All right. Troublemaker, they're high, someone else is high. But maybe, have you ever been that person? You know, late to some important event. I have been that person, late. Maybe you're trying to get to a job interview or your daughter's graduation. What if someone is rushing? This is true. When my mom had her stroke, I was that person because I was rushing. She wanted me to be there as soon as possible. I ended up rushing to the ER. So I was that person. But if we can do this with cars on the road, who at the time we can't even see these people. It's just a car. It's the red car and the blue car. It's the small car. But if we can do it with cars, think how easy it is to do with people in our lives. And all of these stories that we assign to people, or myths, they rely on assumptions. And is it any wonder that one of the more popular books ever, and one of the simplest spiritual books ever, is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And in that book, the third agreement is don't make assumptions. Don Miguel Ruiz says that the problem with making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We could swear they are real. And we make assumptions about what others are doing, what others are thinking, and why, and then we gossip about it. We perpetuate it. And Don Miguel Ruiz goes on to say, all the sadness and drama you have lived in your life is rooted in making assumptions and taking things personally. Now, that makes you stop and think. If he, he's written so many books, but for him to say that all the sadness and drama you have lived in your life is rooted in making assumptions and taking things personally, it's worth some further investigation at a minimum. So there may be assumptions that are limiting the scope of your life, such as, I'll just throw out a few. Love is dangerous. People are not trustworthy. He and I will never get along. She and I will never get along. Assumptions. I'm too shy. Okay. Whatever they are, feel free to put assumptions in the chat. But stories and assumptions, when we put them aside, can create miracles. And I wanted to share a few stories. I shared these about 3 years ago. I'm not sure, I didn't really remember these, but it was interesting to bring them out again. These are a couple of stories that are very short about people who put aside assumptions about the other. So one, an unlikely friendship emerged between a KKK leader and an outspoken Black activist. In the early 70s, Ann Atwater was a poor welfare mother, and C.P. Ellis was the exalted, Grand Cyclops of the Durham, North Carolina KKK. They were on opposing sides of a debate on public school integration. And initially their relationship was very, very tough. But after a while, they began to work together at these meetings, and they developed an understanding of each other, and they formed, according to this article, a deep and loving friendship that continues to this day. Putting aside assumptions. The next one, Rob, a homeless man in Boston Common. So Rob is the homeless man, and Peter, a wealthy lawyer, they would pass each other every day in the park. And Peter walked to work each day through this park, and soon he began to chat. Beginning with saying hi. And Rob, the homeless guy, said he enjoyed reading. And Peter then gave him a book. And then they began to chat about the book. And together they ended up starting a book club for homeless people. And it inspired a movement in other cities where people started their own such book clubs. Isn't that amazing? Who would have thought? And finally, 3 years ago, you may remember, Congressman Elijah Cummings passed away. Civil rights champion, chairman of one of the congressional committees that was involved in the impeachment inquiries. And Elijah Cummings formed a friendship with someone. So he was a Democrat. He formed a friendship with a Republican congressman named Mark Meadows, who you may have heard of, from North Carolina. And at an emotional eulogy, Mark Meadows said this about his departed friend. He said, "Perhaps this place and this country would be better served with a few more unexpected friendships." So these are the kinds of stories that they wouldn't be possible if people had clung to their stereotypes. And one of the reasons why these are unexpected is because it doesn't happen very often. But I believe that we, being spiritual people, we being like-minded souls, we want to be people to change the world. We want to be people who are the first to break out of these stereotyping, labeling behaviors, these assumptions. We want to surprise people with our behavior. I was just thinking one of the ways we do that is to say hi. I know so many of you say hi to the person at the check stand. Say, and even though they may just not even say, smile back, you smile. Going to the paying the toll on the bridge, the person is just like, just transaction. And you, as spiritual people, many of you have told me stories about, oh, I pull up to that person and I say, how you doing? Hello. And even if they don't give that back to me, I know I am exuding that energy. And maybe, just maybe, that person is going to say hello to the car behind me. So what if we expect the unexpected from people? One of those stories happened this week, and I did have a much longer backstory behind this, but you may have heard that my brother and I have not always had the most wonderful relationship. It's been a little contentious over the years. But my brother was a huge source of support with me, for me this week when something really serious happened at work. It was just very stressful. And my brother was constantly checking in on me. And the day I had this big meeting, he was texting me, and he took a 7 a.m. phone call from me as I was, trying to make decisions about what I was going to do. And it all turned out okay, more than okay, but he was there for me. And I was thinking, well, I don't have to label my brother as all good. I can just think about there can be two truths. Hopefully my brother won't watch this video in the future. There could be two truths. My brother can be the biggest jerk in the world, but at the same time, he can be the most loving and supportive brother in the world. I'm going to give space for those two truths to be. The same with my mom. I don't have to assign her as either in or out of my past. I can say there are two truths. Sure, my mom was very, very, very difficult, but she was also the most loving person in my life. Two truths. So I'm going to change gears here a little bit and talk about, you may have a myth or assumption about your own life, about yourself as a person, that is entirely untrue, but you're convinced and you're acting as if it's true. And some of those myths that I've had over the years are, I'm not as smart as my coworkers. I'll never be able to afford to retire. I'll die alone. I deserve to suffer somehow. These add your own to this list. I know people have a lot of these things. And some of these things are, I know intellectually they aren't true. But my emotional self, my subconscious self hangs on to these tape recordings, if you will, and keeps on playing them. And sometimes I don't even know that tape recording is playing. I don't even know that I'm obeying the tape recording of old that is not true. That's how subtle it is. It's subtly playing in the background like elevator music. And I'm following it like in a trance. So I worked for a fairly high profile company a few years ago, and it was review time. And I was really worried. I was thinking, I had not been doing a good job at all. And so I walked into the review, nervous, defensive already. And this was one of these things where I review myself. And at the end, my boss gives me a review. And she said at the end, I want you to pause for a moment and realize what a good job you're doing. Do you know that? And I remember it was so spiritual and so nurturing the way she said that, because she could probably read that I was pretty hard on myself and she wanted to correct that. But I had made up this whole set of stories in my head to the contrary. And along the way, I was looking for corroborating evidence that I wasn't doing a good job. That saying, we see mostly what we look for, that's what I was seeing. That's what I was looking for. So I was reinforcing my own inner story about myself constantly. So what myths do you have about your life that you intellectually know are not true, but you're continuing maybe listening to these subtle tape recordings? What thoughts of lack and limitation? As Carl Jung would talk about, what masks are you wearing to fit into certain social structures and expectations, masks that aren't the real you? Michael Beckwith said, we are more than we think we are. We're so much more than we think we are. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we're in this room, is to remember how great we are. And we need to be on the lookout for self-defeating assumptions. We need to be on the lookout for self-limiting ideas about our world, such as we will never cure global pollution. Well, I just read an article this morning that said scientists in Florida have developed a way to regrow, to grow coral in a lab. And that could be a game changer for the environment. And I read these things and I want to look for these things. So let's overwrite these assumptions. And the first step is just becoming aware that that tape recording is even there, by becoming aware that we're still listening to that tape recording. So the next time you catch yourself falling into a story with a family member, someone pulling your strings based on an old story, the solution could be just neutrality. I had a healer that used to say, if there's ever a fight going on, just go to neutral. Go to neutral. You don't have to go to kind, just go to neutral. And then just, breathe. And then a next step is when you're having stories about yourself, maybe go to kindness about our long-held personal myths. So in closing, I want to read something that Marianne Williamson wrote about stories that we tell ourselves. And this is a pretty interesting quote. I read it with, it's still one of these things that kind of stops you in your tracks and makes you think, even today. And she said, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us the most. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? She goes on to say, actually, who are you not to be these things? Because you are a child of God. You playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Like the person on the road, even though they can't feel, they have no idea what we're thinking, but I'm convinced if we're giving them anger is spreading like a prayer throughout the world. The person at the check stand, the family member, the person at work, yourself. So as you become the first person to give up these feelings, these negative feelings, and you just exude positive feelings, it's infectious. It's infectious. And we begin to dispel these myths, these stories that we want to dissolve. Thank you. And so it is.